G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and today we're looking at the Salamanders in this episode of Getting Started in the Horus Heresy. So this is a part 2 episode. The first part of the episode, of course, we talk about the building the actual force. In part 2, we talk about the units and rules associated with the Legion. In part 3, we'll talk about the Primarch special characters, actually constructing lists, as well as different types of conversion parts and accessories and third-party stuff that you might use in this. So overall, the series builds on what's come before in each episode, so don't expect all the answers in any single episode. So the Salamanders are actually in a really, really bad place. I think they're personally the Legion I'm playing in this edition, but the worst Legion in the edition, by far. They have their strong points, and there are ways of making them work like anything. Same as the Raven Guard. It's not that they're unplayable or anything like that, but they are heavily handicapped compared to other legions who just have flat bonuses. This is because the edition both plays against the Salamanders, as we'll get into, and because their legion traits, I think, are very situational and overvalued when they were written. And this is something that the Raven Guard fell into the trap of as well. So, to begin with, we have their legion trait. And their primary legion trait is when you roll to wound Salamanders, so the person shooting them, attacks them with a Volkite, a Plasma, a Melter, or a Flamer weapon, it reduces the roll by -1. So a Strength 8 weapon would normally wound them on 2s, instead it wounds them on 3s, because of the -1 to what you roll on the dice. This is a bit of a problem, because it doesn't affect the instant death threshold of the weapon or the strength. So the Iron Hands buff, for example, is a flat -1 to the strength of all shooting against the unit. In this instance, it is ever so slightly harder for the weapons to wound you, but if they do wound you, they'll still instant kill the model. Very situational. Yeah, it's kind of good on units like, say, Dreadnoughts, for instance. So Dreadnoughts in the Salamanders are particularly strong, for example, because the stuff you would normally use to fight Dreadnoughts, like Melter weapons, for example, are worse off at doing that job. But on your basic infantry, Terminators, anything like that, that -1 isn't really going to help you, because if a Melter gun hits you, it is still going to kill. So very, very situational, and it is only those 4 weapon types. Bolt guns, battle cannons, las cannons, anything like that, it's just going to go straight through your armor and going to roll to wound you as per normal. It also has no effect on close combat. It's essentially shooting based, because the only thing that's like this in close combat that might affect you is maybe melter bombs, so maybe vehicles, I guess. Yeah, not very good, I'm afraid. There is an additional point to this, though, which is all models in the Legion that have the Legiones Astartes Salamanders and have either multiple wounds or multiple hull points gain the It Will Not Die, and it is a 6+ It Will Not Die, which is terrible and nigh on useless. One of those special rules that is overvalued by the people who wrote the system. It needs to be a 5+. 6+ is just too rare for the amount of times that it's actually going to be coming into play during a game. You're just too unlikely to actually get it. 1 in 6 chance is not good on, say, 3 and 4 hull point vehicles, because you're probably never going to get it in a game before your vehicle dies. And on a 2 wound model, yeah, you got really bad chances. 1 in 3 of your 2 wound models might make a single successful It Will Not Die. Yeah, I'd rather just take a feel no pain. But of course, you can have both. You can have both. The Salamanders have an advanced reaction. Duty is sacrifice. This is an interesting reaction. What it does is it buffs your unit. You go up by +1 weapon skill, strength, and attacks, but at the end of the assault phase, after morale and all that is concluded, the Salamanders player rolls a d6 for every model, and on a 6, you take a wound with no saves or damage mitigation rolls against it. So no feel, no pain, no shrouded, no nothing like that. You just take that wound on the chin. Not a really good trade-off, again, compared to some Legion's advanced traits. This one, it's interesting, but it sucks. Incredibly situational and at least being a 6 on a 6, a roll of a 6, it's just like with the it will not die. It's not going to come off too often, but the thing is, if it's a squad of 10 models, for example, that do it, you're probably going to take 1 to 2 wounds, which will kill a model outright. Is that a good trade-off for +1 strength and toughness? Unlikely most of the time. +1 strength, weapon skill, and attack. It will have its places. You'll have to use it wisely, but there are many other reactions that are just simply better in the assault phase. Being Salamanders, you're probably going to want to do something like an Overwatch, for instance, because you have so many buffs to your Overwatching. I don't know. We'll get to that later. There's also another little thing, which is if the enemy fails in their charge attempt against you after you declare the reaction, then instead of rolling the d6 and doing any attacks, you just gain Fearless until the end of the next turn, which is, it's fine. It's interesting thing about Fearless. If you do that, by the way, the unit will lose any shrouding they may have. Shrouded, no unit that's Fearless can benefit from Shrouded. Important to note. Alright, Warlord Traits. There are 3 Warlord Traits, and I think the first one, the loyalist one, is the best, and that is the Weight of Duty. When you use this Warlord trait, all models in the unit the Warlord joins, and the Warlord himself get +1 strength characteristic when in close combat with an enemy that has Fear or a variant of the Fear special rule. On top of that, any model, anytime he joins one of those units and they fight traitors, they gain Hatred special rule against them, which is pretty cool. Now, you can't take Legion Destroyers or Moritats in this force, so it's like, okay, your Salamanders, you kind of expect that anyway, because radiation is bad, but burning people to death with flamers is good. That's Salamanders Logic 101. And you get an additional reaction in the assault phase. Sure. The second one is the Promethean Will. A Warlord with this trait and all models in his unit, they get +1 to their leadership when taking a pinning check. And they reduce the effects of a Fear special rule by 1. So if it's Fear 1, it just ceases to exist, essentially. Which is kind of useful against, say, Night Lords, who you're sort of being set up to be the main antagonist of this Legion. You can't take, funny enough, Destroyers or Moritats. And on top of that, you get an additional reaction during the shooting phase. And lastly, the Redemption of Flames, which is a traitor-only Warlord trait. And the Warlord in this one, him and his unit, they get +1 for all their to wound and armor penetration rolls with flame and Volkite weapons. It's only affecting their shooting attacks though, and you get to make an additional reaction during the assault phase. So, not particularly strong Warlord traits. Promethean Will, if it was army-wide, if the whole army had +1 leadership for pinning checks and ignored Fear 1, that would be amazing. That would be an awesome top-tier Warlord trait, but affecting only the Warlord and his unit, it's not super situational. There'll be times where they're targeted by pinning attacks, but I think it's going to come into play very, very few times playing the Horus Heresy. Versus, say, the Weight of Duty. When you are in close combat, your Warlord's going to fight a lot of close combats. Most people's Warlords will fight 2 to 3 per game. So having a constant buff in those combats against fear-causing enemies, and just having essentially the bonus of a Chaplain, Hatred, in all your combats against traitors is going to be really good. So it's definitely the cream of the crop when it comes to Warlord traits. Then we get to the Rites of War. Now, I actually really like one of these Rites of War, the Covenant of Fire, which is the first one. And what it does, it makes Pyroclasts and Legion Tactical Support Squads, which have the exclusive Dragon's Breath Flamer weapons, which are exclusive to the Salamanders, that is. It makes those units troops. So not support, not non-compulsory, it makes them troops. You can take them, you can fill your compulsory slots with them. And they gain the Line special rule, which is rare, as you might have seen from the other Rites of War we've covered so far. So Salamanders here, massive leg up in the Rite of War department, because they get to take one of their Legion Specialist units, and they get to take a Legion unit, which is the Tactical Support Squad, which you're not going to see a huge amount of in this edition, as they're currently written, unfortunately. It makes them both interesting unit types to take, and you're taking them in troops, so it's really taking you in an all-or-nothing flame territory. On top of that, another bonus is you get your Predator Squadrons, which have Dragon's Breath weapons, and it says exclusively Dragon's Breath in the rules. So that means no Pintle Multi-Melter or anything like that. You can take those Predators as non-compulsory troops choices. So if you're struggling to fill out your troops and you've completely filled your heavy support, you could throw a Predator Squadron into here instead. Awesome. Limitations. No Deep Strike Assault, no Deep Strikers of any kind. That includes Subterranean Assault, Drop Pods, whatever it may be. That will affect you if you're using jump packs, for example. You can use the jump packs as normal on the battlefield, but you can't Deep Strike into play with them. Detachment using this Rite of War may not include Destroyers or Moritats. Well, only the Traitor Warlord trait will even allow that, so 2/3 of the Warlord traits are going to stop you from being able to do that anyway, so I don't know why it's specified that you can't take them in here, because it's such a limitation. Like, it's you're almost never going to take them anyway, so yeah, hardly limitation at all. Again, good thing for the Warlord trait. And lastly, you must include a Centurion who's been upgraded to a Consul. He can be in Tartarus Terminator armor, can be in Cataphract, he can be power armor. Doesn't matter, but you must take a champion. Fine, cool with that. Champions are pretty good. Then there's the second Warlord trait, the Awakening Fire, and this is not a very good one. So, the effects. All models of both the infantry unit type and the Legiones Astartes Salamanders may take Fear 1 for 20 points. That's a lot of points for a sort of situational bonus. It's not terrible. But it is a lot of points. Do you want to sink 1/5 of a tactical squad's points back into them? Probably not. But for certain units, like say Legion Terminators, Terminator Command Squads, that kind of thing, if you can get this onto them, yeah, that's worth it. Take it. They will get a good benefit from it. All models of the infantry unit type in this detachment ignore all modifiers to their leadership when making pinning checks. So this automatically kind of negates the Warlord trait number 2, which has the +1 leadership against pinning. You're just outright negating the negative effects of pinning checks, which are usually, -1. So, yeah, okay. You see what I mean here about the Warlord traits, and same problem as the Raven Guard. A lot of rules are cancelling one another out, so a situational benefit you might get from having the Legion or from taking a Warlord trait is cancelled out elsewhere in the rules. It's really weird. Third thing that the Rite of War does is your Psychers in the detachment, which I don't know how common they'll be yet in this edition. It still remains to be seen. But they get to take the Salamander's exclusive discipline, the Fury of the Salamander. And the last bonus effect of this Rite of War is that your non-compulsory HQs, you get an additional one, but it must be a chaplain if you take it. In the drawbacks to this, you can only include one unit with the cavalry type, so that's things like jet bikes. That's kind of a problem. I think that also includes speeders, land speeders. Cavalry units are what you would kind of include in the Salamander's force to get some additional firepower, outflanking, that kind of thing. Not being able to take it kind of hurts you, and it's one of the biggest detriments of this Rite of War. On top of that, you can't include any Legion Warhawk jump packs, so no jump infantry, period, in the army. That's a big downside. But you can include apothecaries or Legion Tech Marines that have the cavalry type, and it won't affect this limitation. So, bizarre choices there. Attachment using this Rite of War must include a chaplain, and it cannot include Vulcan. So, a really eclectic Rite of War, and I don't really know what it's targeted at. It really just makes you slightly better at taking pinning, and you cause a little bit of fear. Nowhere near as interesting as the version of these rules from Heresy 1.0. Salamander's Psychic Disciplines now. Salamander's Fury Psychic Power is essentially the Psycho, if he successfully pulls off the power, makes all the open terrain around him within 18 inches difficult terrain, and any difficult terrain around him dangerous terrain. It doesn't say anything about making the dangerous terrain even more dangerous if it was dangerous already, so okay. Not a terrible power, but the problem is he can't shoot, move, or run after he casts it. So your Psyker just becomes a sitting duck, whether it's him and his squad or him standing alone. I don't really rate that as a power, therefore. Too situational. And you have a psychic weapon called Elemental Horror. Essentially, it's a psychic flamer. It's strength 7, AP 4. It's got pinning, it's got deflagrate, it's got Shell Shock 3 and Psychic Focus, which is if you fail your psychic check and you get a perils, but your perils isn't a bad one, then you can go on and do other things with your turn, but you can't use the power. Big whoop. Shell Shock 3 and pinning with that many attacks, it may actually work. It may actually pin squads. But you've got to get close to do it. Like, to get hit on a squad, you've got to get close. That's the problem with templates. And if you're getting that close, what are you doing in the rest of your turn is my question. Because, being a Salamander Psyche, you're probably going to be in a unit that's going to be doing an assault or firing a bunch of templates anyway. You're probably going to have a Dragon's Breath Combi Flamer on your Chaplain. Or your Librarian, apologies. I don't know. It's a cool little power, but nothing to write home about. And you do get the Etheric Lightning spell for free, which is, it's fine. Moving on, you get to the Armory of the Salamanders, and this is where things get bad for the Legion. And I'll preface this by saying, if this was in Heresy 1, it would be great, but in Heresy 2, it is not. Because the ability to upgrade your heavy bolters to heavy flamers is really thematic, and Dragon's Breath weapons are taking a flamer, all flamer weapons, and they're given +1 strength, they all become AP 4, and the Flamestorm Cannon gains Torrent 18 inches, which is really bizarre. So Torrent means when you use a flamer, you can measure a point up to 18 inches away from the firing unit, and you place the template with the smaller end closer to the unit firing, and you can flame a unit. So it gives you a bunch of extra range on your flamer weapon, which is cool. The problem is the weapon it's on is an AP 3 weapon, so you're reducing it to AP 4 for the +1 strength and the ability to fire it at a greater distance, when most likely this is going to be on a Legion Predator. The Predator is likely going to be armed with heavy flamers, so it wants to get close and use all those flamers anyway. Having the ability to use the one flamer at a greater distance is okay, but it's nothing to write home about. What concerns me here is that this edition is terrible for flamers, because you don't get automatic overwatch on every unit that gets charged in this edition. It's a reaction, and it's one reaction per phase, unless you have something that gives you an additional one. So, for example, most of the Salamanders' Warlord Traits might give you a second one. That means you get one chance to use the Wall of Death, and yep, it's a D6 Wall of Death. That's decent, But the problem is heavy. Heavy unit type is everywhere in this edition. Anything Cataphracti, pretty much anything with a boarding shield. Legion Heavy Support Squads, the sort of units that you want to be targeting with flamer weapons. You would normally narrow the field against Terminators with, say, a ton of heavy flamers. But the problem is a ton of heavy flamers against Terminators now, those Terminators are getting 2+ armor saves with rerolls. And if you combine that with something like an Apothecary as well for Feel No Pain, you're looking at 3 saving attempts for those Terminators against your 1 attacking attempt. That's not ideal, and because this edition is full of it, Land Speeders have it, Terminators, Cataphracti ones that is, which are very common. They're in the starter box, everyone's got a set now. They're everywhere. Breaches, Phalanx Warders, Medusan Immortals, Crimson Paladins, Inner Circle Knights Cenobium, the list goes on. They're everywhere. And so, I don't think people took that into account when they wrote these rules, because the main strength of flamers is the ability to saturate wounds on a unit. But if you are reducing the amount of times you can overwatch, it's relying on you, the Salamanders, to have enough mobility to get yourself, in your shooting phase, in range of the enemy unit. And there's an awful lot of reactions out there that allow the enemy unit to move back from you D6 or 12 inches. Take Raven Guard, for example. They can move their initiative distance away from you. So you need to get really, really close because the flamers only have an 8-inch range. So between the short range of the weapon, plus the limited amount of Overwatch that one can provide, plus the fact that this edition is full of units that have re-rolling armor saves against you, flamers are heavily nerfed, and a slight increase in strength does not negate the problem. And this being the quintessential piece of war gear for the Salamanders, it sucks. You know, other legions out there have AP2 weapons and AP3 weapons that they can give to all of their guys in a squad in some circumstances. Cool weapons they can give their squad sergeants. You've got Phoenix Spears, you've got Chagorian Warglaives, you have frost weapons for Space Wolves, Cut Array weapons for World Eaters, Tyrannic Greatswords on Dark Angels. For Salamanders, it's, you've got a slightly better flamer. And again, the addition plays against you. So, whilst it's cool to have flamers, and I myself am taking all the flamers, you have to live in the reality of the situation when you build this legion, which is committing to a whole bunch of flamers is probably shooting yourself in the foot. Because although the playstyle guides you towards doing it, your legion weapons suck, and the addition hurts you for doing it. It's a really important point that I have to stress in this video. Now, the last two items of war gear are interesting. Dragon Scale Storm Shield, which is available to independent characters and to Terminators in the Salamanders Legion. 15 points for independent characters, 10 points for Terminators. It gives you a 5+ invul or +1 to your invul, but it takes up that hand so you can't have another weapon in it. It's a cool little piece of war gear. It's, for some reason, nowhere near as good as the Imperial Fists, even though the Salamanders are the master artificers of the legions. They make a worse Storm Shield than the Imperial Fists, who just give you a flat 3-up invul save, and whoever they stick it on. Good for them, I guess. The one good thing, though, is that on Imperial Fists, it is limited to Terminator armor. On the Salamanders, you can put on your power-armored characters. The other item of war gear is the Mantle of the Elder Drake. It used to be Eternal Warrior. In this edition, it's Battle Hardened 1, so you count your toughness as 1 point higher when it comes to instant death thresholds. So you won't get instant kill by a Power Fist, but you're still screwed royally by Brutal Attacks and Paragon Blades. For 35 point upgrade for your Praetor only, it sucks in this edition. But they're cool items, I'll give them that. Alright, moving on from there, let's talk about the special units. And this is really the only saving grace of the Salamanders. They have two really good special units. The Pyroclast first, and the Fire Drake second. So the Pyroclast, 175 points for 5 guys, but we're talking 2 wounds, 2 attacks each. They've got a higher leadership than most. They've all got Artificer armor. They have It Will Not Die 5+, which is the good kind, and the Mantle of Ash special rule, which is they get a 5+ invul against Flame, Plasma, Melter, and Volkite weapons. So against these guys, the very situational Legion bonus of -1 on the dice roll against them, that becomes a lot better for you because it's -1 on the dice roll and you get an invul against it. Okay, cool. That actually works. Why didn't you do that for the rest of the Legion? They also come with Melter Bombs on the whole squad by default. It's 30 points per additional guy, which is fine. They can take a Land Raider as a dedicated transport as well, which is really good on Power Armored unit. And they have a special weapon called a Flame Projector. The Flame Projector can be either used as a Salamander's Dragon's Breath Heavy Flamer, so Strength 6 AP4, or it can be used as a Melter Gun. Range 12, Strength 8 AP1, Armor Bane. Get to pick, what do you do? These guys are Dreadnought killers. They can fire so many Melter Gun shots, they will kill Dreadnoughts. It's really awesome. On top of that, with the Flame Projectors, they can do a lot of saturation fire. So, as I said, one of the big weaknesses of the Legion is relying on, flame weapons to do everything. But for these guys, if they come against Terminators, you're not going to go, oh, let's Overwatch them with, Wall of Death Flamers. Nah, screw that. Overwatch them with the Melter Guns. Kill those Terminators outright. No double wounds, no feel, no pain for you. Just do not pass go, do not collect $200. Bye, dead. Hence why they're so good in the Covenant of Fire Rite of War when they become scoring troops. It's like they just want you to have an army of Pyroclasts. That really is. And the Squad Sergeant can take a Power Weapon, a Power Fist, or a Thunder Hammer. Power Weapon or Thunder Hammer are really the two options. Ignore the Power Fist. Alright, moving on from this unit, the Fire Drakes. So the Fire Drakes are expensive. That's the limiting factor. They're really good, but really expensive. Not my favourite Terminator unit just because of the price. You're paying 50 points a model, but you are getting a Weapon Skill 5 Cataphractii Terminator. They can be taken as a command squad instead of just being taken as elite Terminators. And they get to reroll all failed to hit rolls of a 1 in melee, which is pretty cool. Now, the Fire Drakes, they are stubborn. They have It Will Not Die 5+. So again, instead of 6+, like the rest of the Legion rules, they're like Pyroclast. They get the 5+, It Will Not Die, which is good. You want that. And they can take Thunderhammers on everyone and Dragon Scale Storm Shields on everyone. And they can also take Dragon's Breath Heavy Flamers, but I think what they should have been allowed, honestly, was Multi-Melter. If they had a Multi-Melter option in here, that would play better to type, because it's like the writers have forgotten that the Salamanders made artificer weapons of every kind, and whilst they had a flame fetish, they also have a melter fetish. So probably the one little blemish on this unit is they should have a Multi-Melter as an option as well. Instead, the only heavy weapon option they have is a Dragon's Breath Heavy Flamer. If you do choose to take Thunderhammers and Dragon Scale Storm Shields and everyone, prepare to pay through your butt. You're going to be paying well over 700 points for a 10-man unit. So choose wisely what you do there. For example, in a competitive bracket with these guys, you could get 15 Tartarus Terminators of the Imperial Fists with Storm Shields and Power Fists. So, yeah, you're paying a lot of points for those 10 guys, but they're a good 10 guys. Anyway, that takes us to the end of the Salamanders Legion. I think I've demonstrated my point, though, overall, which is that the Legion, they're very vanilla. You get very situational and limited Legion bonuses, very limited additional war gear available to you. So essentially, this is like playing a Legion with no Legion tactics if you want to play stock standard Salamanders, unfortunately, because there is so little you can do with them. Because you're just being hamstrung by the rules of the edition, and the Warlord traits don't sync up well with the Rights of War either, with doubling up in one case of the Right of War with the Warlord trait. They're two cancel one another out. It's a really bizarre Legion. It's not that you can't make them work. In fact, I think a Fury of the Ancients Right of War with Salamanders is terrifyingly strong. Maybe not as strong as an Iron Hands one, but it is still really strong because, again, all the weapons you would normally use to kill a Dreadnought, these guys have some level of immunity to it, and the It Will Not Die means that they'll be regenerating on the Dreadnoughts, even if it is on a 6+. So, yeah, Salamanders. Fun, but highly flawed. They are the worst Legion. No doubt about it, because any other Legion, even the Raven Guard, have at least some little tricks up their sleeve, like, Raven's Guard, Raven's Talons, just better Lightning Cores, and at least they're effective against every unit in the game, versus Flamers, which are not, and again, people will be just re-rolling all the stuff you want to be killing with Flamers, like Terminators. They're just going to ignore them. They really are. But they got some fantastic specialist units, which if you spam the specialist units and Dreadnoughts, the Salamanders will pay dividends for you. Let's mince no words. But if you don't, they are a hard Legion to play. Anyway, it's all uphill from here. We've been through the worst of the Legions now. Every other Legion you're going to see from this point on is better. Most of them are in the middle of tier, and it's only the Legions sort of right near the end of this series, like Imperial Fists, Iron Warriors, Night Lords, that are going to be sort of in those top tiers, but we'll get to those. Anyway, Make with the Outer Circle, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all on the next one.